And we're back on the All About the Birds network. This is Phil Steifel. The Carson Wentz talk continues, as always, on this Friday. Yesterday, we broke down the breaking news on our end of the equation. So last night, I got the great idea. We really need to get the other side of the trade's opinions on this. So I sent out a tweet looking for the best Colts reporters, the best guys working the beat out there in Indy. The name that popped up boatloads of times, Kevin Bowen of 107.5 The Fan. Kevin has been gracious enough to join us on the All About the Birds network. Kevin, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, appreciate having me on, Phil.
So let's just dive right into it. You know, there's a lot of mixed reactions in Philly on the trade, and I was listening to some of your work last night. It kind of feel like you might have some mixed reactions on the trade and Carson going to Indy. So our listeners would like to know what your opinion is, but also what the Indy fans are feeling about Carson Wentz as their new quarterback one there.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with the fans. I'd say a little bit over 50-50. I think are big fans of it, to be honest with you. I think part of it just comes from the fact that it's not a Band-Aid move. People, I think, really like the draft compensation, the fact that you aren't mortgaging, too much of your premium picks over the next couple of years, especially not this year as well. I think that's the intrigue. And then lastly, it's just a ton of belief in Frank Reich to get this figured out. And that's probably where I side of, I think fans should be intrigued. Like, Frank Reich has a great track record with quarterbacks in this league. Having said that, and you can speak to this much more, Carson Wentz looked like a broken quarterback last year. There's questions about him mentally. I don't think Frank Reich has ever had a major issue mentally, with a Phillip Rivers or an Andrew Luck or a Nick Foles or something like that. So that's where I think there's reason for pause, reason for concern. This is a franchise that, as you know full well, is taking on a massive cap hit and trading away their franchise quarterback less than 2 years after giving him the deal that they gave him. So I think that is why I'm a little bit of let's pump the brakes on, Dan Orlovsky acting like the Colts are going to be in the Super Bowl next year.
Hey, don't trash Dan. I love Dan.
I love Dan.
I'm a big Carson Wentz fan, and I did not want the Eagles to trade him ever. I thought, it was a bad situation, and obviously after the season, there's no way of fixing it and all. But you brought up like 9 different questions there that I had written down here in that answer there. First off, on the compensation aspect of it, a 3rd-round pick this year, and basically a 1st-round pick next year, most likely.
Right.
I think it's pretty fair. A lot of the Phillies fan base really thought that they were going to get this enormous package for Carson Wentz based off of what he did in 2017 and kind of 18 and 19. How's the rest of the country and Indy? Most of the Philly fans were way off base thinking that they were going to get multiple 1st-round picks or anything even close to the Matthew Stafford trade, correct?
Yeah, Chris Ballard, the general manager here in Indianapolis, is extremely stringent on player value. He does not budge, and clearly it seems like Chicago wasn't even that involved with it yet. The trade package is what it is. I think it's more of an indictment, again, on just what that 2020 season did for the value of a player like Carson Wentz. Injuries, is that any sort of a worry that maybe takes some of that compensation back? And I agree with you. This is pretty much a 1st-round pick. I'd be shocked if it wasn't a 1st-rounder, in 2022. I look at it from 2 sides of it. For one, again, why Colts fans, I think, like the compensation is because you're keeping your 1st and your 2nd-rounder this year. Now, for Philadelphia, it makes sense. They're already drafted very high next year. They don't need a whole lot of ammo if they want to move up a little bit more inside the top 10. I think where Colts fans like it is the fact that you can give that 1st-round pick to a left tackle, the 2nd-round pick, to a wideout or an edge rusher, and then with the cap space you still have, you can go out and really give Carson Wentz some ammunition and maybe a little bit of jolt of confidence with some more personnel. The counter to that would be if this doesn't work out and you go 7-9 or 8-8, and Carson Wentz still plays 75% of the snaps, now you're without a middle of the 1st-round pick, and you might still have a very mediocre to below average quarterback in the NFL. So I tend to side with the first part of that thinking, but I can hear people out on the second part.
Okay. Yeah. So, Indianapolis, at least on the East Coast, it's perceived a little different than Philly, that it's not as, maybe the media is maybe not quite as hard, on their players and coaches and teams as they are in Philadelphia. Obviously, we have this awful reputation out here. Carson Wentz has been, you said, injury prone. He's been perceived soft. He's been perceived not to be able to handle the criticism that this major market in Philly, gives. Do you think that's going to be an issue in Indy at all? Like, obviously he's going in and going to be the quarterback one. He's not going to have the Jalen Hurts or the Nick Foles sitting in the wing, potentially taking his job where the pressure he can't handle. Do you think that there's any notion to that he's soft or can't handle the criticism potentially?
Again, you guys would probably know better than I. It seems to be questions that are at least coming up. So they have to be asked. You would also assume Frank Reich, from a judge of character, and Press Taylor, who's now on the staff here in Indianapolis, would have a pretty good idea of who Carson Wentz is mentally, from the scouting process to seeing him up close for the last handful of seasons in Press Taylor. And I love the Philly fan base and the passion and all of that. Having said that, this is a North Dakota kid going to Philadelphia. Like Indianapolis is probably a little bit more on par with North Dakota, although that feels like a slap in the face in Indianapolis. So I don't know if I want my city being called North Dakota, but it just is a little bit of less pressure, calmer environment, whatever you want to throw out there. I think those are fair statements to make. Now, when you say lack of confidence, I guess that is what is probably the most worrisome aspect to this trade because, when you're inside of a huddle, when you're on game day in the heat of the battle, look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Hear those players talk about what Tom Brady meant to them mentally. Like, oh my gosh, we have that guy. Like, just the jolt of confidence that gives an entire team, let alone the 10 guys in that huddle with you, I think can't be measured. And if your quarterback's confidence is shaken at all, that's going to impact the offense and the team in general. So how do you go about repairing that? I think that's top of the list for the Frank Reich checklist here this offseason.
You already brought up Frank Reich. You got, your offensive coordinator, even your quarterback coach. You've got everybody in Indy now that has had success with Carson Wentz. And obviously they turned around Philip Rivers last year. Philip Rivers was at the end of his career and all, but he had a pretty solid year. Is the fan base really buying that Frank Reich and company can fix whatever it is mentally or physically that is wrong with Carson? Because if they fix him, you guys got a former potential MVP candidate as your quarterback one now.
Yes, I would say yes. And I guess that is where the intrigue comes. If this is not a Band-Aid move, like you said, this is a 28-year-old quarterback that theoretically still has a decade left in the league, you would hope, again, if you're Colts fans. And the contract is not overbearing. The next 2 years, $47 million for the Colts. That's middle of the level starting quarterback, honestly, in today's NFL. So I think you got to acknowledge that. And that's what fans are excited about. I was very much team draft, but knowing full well, moving up from 21 to the top 10 is going to cost a whole lot. I think of the available options, which, boy, it's a sorry list of quarterbacks out there, of the available realistic options, this offers the best chance at a long-term hit. It's not going to be easy. I'm not saying it's a slam dunk, but again, it offers that opportunity, pairing him with people that know him very well, putting him in a better supporting cast, Jonathan Taylor, offensive linemen, things like that. And I think that's what has fans, somewhat excited.
Well, that was going to be my next question. The team the Colts have and the offense they run, it's similar to Eagles, but it's totally different. There's a lot more talent at this moment on the Colts than the Eagles had this past year. Do you think the team, now that you have Carson Wentz, just hypothetically speaking, that he reverts back to even 2018-19 form, do you think the Colts are primed now in a position to make a deeper run into the playoffs than they did this past year?
I think maybe it won't be quite the short-term gain on it as last year. I don't want to undermine what Philip Rivers did this past season. The Colts were 11-5. Now, they did have the easiest schedule in the NFL, and they did bow out in the first round, but I still don't want to undermine what Rivers did. I think with Wentz, it's a little bit more light at the end of the tunnel. You might go 10-6 this year. Something you do play the NFC West, and we know what that division can offer. But maybe in 2022, 2023, now you're starting to reap some of those benefits of getting Wentz more acclimated with this team, back to normal off seasons, things like that. So yeah, I don't know. I
guess I phrased that question wrong. I guess I meant more like, do the weapons that you have on that team really complement, Carson Wentz and his skill set, as a quarterback if he reverts back to his old form?
Yes, I think that's an interesting way to put it. To me, I look at this signing. I think, does that bring back T.Y. Hilton? More of a vertical presence, more of a seam guy down the middle of the field. The read option element to this offense was non-existent because Phillip Rivers moves as well as you or I move. So that will be a little bit more in store as well. Um, I kind of sum this up. Phillip Rivers gives you a higher ceiling but a lower floor. I think we
Okay.
kind of knew where Phillip Rivers was. Like, if you would have showed me the 2020 Phillip Rivers back in July and played the movie for me, I would have walked out and been like, "Oh yeah, that's kind of what I expect." And again, I don't want to sound like a knock. Phillip Rivers is a very fine quarterback, but that's kind of what
Absolutely.
I thought it would be. I think Wentz, you could show me a couple different movies, and I'd be like, "Oh wow, yeah, that could be the case." But I think the fact of, I guess, carrying on this movie analogy, I think the fact that there is that chance for it to be a great film is why the Colts made this move. Because, and like you guys know full well, you've got to take risks at that position. Like, you can't just stand pat. Guys don't fall in your lap. You've got to take chances. This is a chance. There's a reason why the Colts took this chance. Now we'll see if it works out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so Ron Jaworski, everybody knows Ron Jaworski. He's a huge legend in Philly, obviously. He's been on our show before. We love Jaws. He put out a tweet last night that this trade basically helps both teams, moving forward. And he's hoping for Super Bowl 58, Colts versus Eagles. The storylines will basically write itself. That would be a good way to go with it, right?
Yeah, sign me up for that. I think both franchises. And again, I do think Philly, has the opportunity, whether they want to ride with Jalen Hurts or sit there at, what is it, number 7 overall, I think, or number 6, something like that.
Yeah.
Go ahead and either take the quarterback that's there or move on up as well. And as a guy that, has covered Nick Sirianni, I am, super interested to see how Nick does. He's an
Well, I was just going to ask you before we wrapped up this interview, since I had you on the air here, what are your thoughts? I mean, what kind of a gem have we gotten? I mean, a lot of the Philly media and some of the harsher fans ripped his opening press conference apart because you could tell he had some nerves. But then after that, he's done a few more press conferences, and I'm super excited about Nick Sirianni. It's a 50-50 fan base on him right now. What are we getting with Nick Sirianni?
So I'll divide it up into this. There's good and there's unknown. The good is this: extremely relatable guy you want to have a beer with, and I think that helps in the locker room. And I think he's extremely intelligent. I mean, Frank Reich's not going to hire, again, you or me to be the offensive coordinator. He wants a brilliant offensive mind. And I think for you to have that offensive mind but still be very relatable, that's hard to find. And I do think Sirianni offers that. Having said that, it's fair to say he never had 1 ounce of accountability here in Indianapolis. And again, that's not a fault on him. It's just the reality of Frank Reich was the play caller. And Nick Sirianni didn't do that on game day. So, we just didn't get to see a whole lot of Sunday heat on Nick Sirianni. And I do think what we saw in that press conference, I'm not going to get overblown about that, but I think what you're starting to see is you've got to now answer the questions that are going to be asked. And that is a totally different animal than simply being a sounding board. And again, I don't want to just kind of underestimate what Sirianni's role is, but now he's the play caller. Now he handles player discipline. Now he handles decisions about roster to a degree, play time, obviously in-game decisions, what happens on Sundays, all of that. And that is just a totally different animal than what he had to deal with here in Indianapolis.
No, I appreciate that. That's really interesting. Again, when you hire a 39-year-old head coach, you get rid of your franchise quarterback. There's a lot of unknowns in Philly right now. But I appreciate your time, Kevin, for jumping on the All About the Birds network to give us a little piece of the other side of the equation here. That moving on from Carson Wentz, it's the end of an era. Even though it was a short era, it's the end of an era for us. And I'm hoping he does really well there in Indy. I'm hoping the best of success for the Colts for you guys, unless we get to a Super Bowl and then then you guys are dead to me and I won't root for you at all. But again, you guys can follow Kevin Bowen at KBowen1070. He's over at 107.5 The Fan. I'm sure he'll be posting and commenting all year long on all of Carson's trials and tribulations as he moves forward with the Colts and all. Again, Kevin, thank you so much for joining the All About the Birds network.
I appreciate it, Phil. Good luck.
Have a great day.
See you, man.
Go Birds.